So, I just have 20 minutes in order to have a couple of slides, couple 97. So it's clear that I won't have the time to explain absolutely everything I want to talk about here, but I just have a general problem and I want you to express a general approach, the general topic, without entering into all the details, because there are a bunch of different problems with this, in these slides. So just follow me, just in order to have a general view of what I want to do. So here is the plan. With first problem is what can we say and what can we do with negating. There's a lot of problems, including in philosophy. Number two is a general construction. I want to propose an algebraic framework in order to make sense of negation in every sense of the words, because there are plenty of different sense of negating, and I propose something like a general logical framework in order to make sense of everyone. The part 3 is I will use QAS. QAS is question-answer semantics. I will use this framework in order to find a solution to the first problem from the number one, and the 4, if I have time to do in this part, just a very general conclusion as a sketchy way of explaining my point in a general project for the next month. Okay, so here is the problem of negation, because of course there is a lot of different view of negations: linguistic, logical, psychological, and philosophical. So I dislike these sorts of borderlines, because why do we want to have a borderline or difference between linguistic and logical negation, for instance? Isn't there something like a channel between both sorts of negation? Negation can be produced syntactically and semantically, in the sense that we can have use of negation, logical negation, as a function, from true to falsity or falsity to truth in the classical logic, for instance. Or we can have a negation upon a predicate or upon a general sentence. Syntactically speaking, there are differences. So I don't want to have a one-sided reduction. I don't want to have just one representation of negation, because there are plenty of different negations. And so the point is something like a Hegelian type moral. It's a motto. It's a unity in diversity. So in order to use a general framework with including different negations, but only one general operator, so to say. So by a generalization of negation, I mean what Vansing said or projected about his paper about negation. By generalization, it's just to give an account such that various syntactic types of negation emerge as special cases of a general construction. So that's the point, unity in diversity, so to say. So there is a lot of different problems in philosophy, especially. Of course, I think that you are very familiar with this point from ABCD, paradox of non-being, or Parmenides in Russell's stance. Dialectical negations, it's worse, with Heidegger's Nicht und das Nichts, and Hegel Aufhebung. So it's supposed to be a nightmare for analytic philosophers. The question is it possible to make sense to such negations? So problem C, Elena will approach this problem just after me, the color exclusion problem. Goethe or Wittgenstein approach this problem, for instance, and Eastern negations, because there are a very specific way of using negation in Buddhist philosophy and in Saptabongi, or different schools from Indian philosophy. And very, very interesting to try to make sense of this sort of negations. So QAS, just a framework for the second part of my talk. And according to me, there are 3 assumptions when you are speaking about negations, 3 biases, so to say. Logical and linguistic negations are supposed to be irreducible to each other. There is linguistic negation and logical negation. Why? Why not have one and the same framework? First question about the assumption. The second is logical negation is supposed to be a truth functional operator. So it's something like a range upon true value. Question, what is the meaning of a true value? And the third point, Frege, of course, Frege gives answers to these questions, but I want to challenge Frege's point. And the third point is negation has essentially to do with exclusion and incompatibility. So when you negate something, do you create something incompatible every time or not? So these 3 biases are supposed to restrict the logical approach of negation. That's a problem, according to me. Okay, so the first paradox, it's a very famous from Parmenides fragments to Russell's point about negative existential. So the Russell solution is to be we have just to say that when you say something about a non-existent entity, like King of France or Dark Vador, I don't know exactly, so you say something false, because there is no such a thing that this thing is has some properties. So the problem with Wesselian analysis, that is, if you assume existence of the subject when you predicate something, every sentence, including a non-existing subject, is condemned to be false. That's a problem, because of course you can say something true about Sherlock Holmes, about Santa Claus, and one possibility to settle this problem has been approached by free logic, but according to me it's just something like a mechanical, it's just a mechanical way of settling the problem, but it's not very understanding the problem. So the question is, does truth require existence, for instance? Isn't it possible to say something true without the subject being existent, for instance? That has to do with Meinungs, that has to do with different sort of truth, different theory of truth, etc. So, the first point is, according to Quine, we cannot identify, we cannot talk about something without identifying this object. And my second question is, isn't it possible to identify something without existence? That's the second point. That's a very, very ancient point from the Middle Age, with Anselm, for instance, of Canterbury, and so on. So, Parmenides say what can be spoken of and thought must be. For it's possible for it to be, but it's not possible for nothing to be. So, of course, the question is it something? Is it correct to translate this fragment by the way of the word nothing? Could we say that Santa Claus, Sherlock Holmes, is it correct to say that there are nothing, or are there something else than nothing? Because the problem comes from Parmenides' approach of nothingness, so to say. And Russell said that when you think, we think of something. When you use a name, it must be the name of something. Therefore, both thought and language require objects outside themselves. There is something like an ontological commitment with respect to the truth of the sentence. Why? Again. Okay, so that was the first problem, a general problem. And the second one is negative facts. Because if you say that, for instance, according to a correspondence theory of truth, we are supposed to say this sentence is true because, according to the theory, correspondence theory, there is a fact that makes the proposition true. Okay? And what about negative propositions? Is it correct to talk about a negative fact that makes the sentence true or the proposition true? This is a very, very famous problem from Russell's early philosophy, with his debate with the student Demos. Wittgenstein refused such a view of negative facts, but both assumed a logical atomism. So what is exactly the difference between logical atomism and assumption upon negative facts? There is a problem with interaction between logic and ontology. We have to philosophize about this, if any. Heidegger's very, very famous quotation from analytic philosophers, because according to them, it doesn't make sense. Das selbst nicht is just something like a rubbish. It's like as das Regen regnet, das ist nothing. So you just have to say it's just bad poetry, according to Carnap. Is it correct? Is it fair to say this? According to me, no, of course, because you have to think about this before condemning, a priori, so to say. There's a difference between Wittgenstein's view about nonsense, because he has something sinnlos and unsinnig. Okay? According to Carnap, das nicht, selbst nichtet, is something unsinnig. Why? Because it's possible to translate this sentence with, in English, the nothing noth, or the nothing nihilates, as proposed by John Salas. According to Carnap's logical syntax, it's not possible to use, it's not correct to use negation as a noun or as a predicate, because it's just an operator. So if you have a logical syntax in order to make sense of what you say, of whatever you want to say, the negation, according to Carnap's logical syntax, negation is just a constant, it's just a logical constant. It's not a noun, it's not a predicate, and here it's both a noun and a predicate. So it's rubbish, according to Carnapian view of Heideggerian philosophy, for instance. Is it correct? That's the question. Hegel's Aufhebung. According to Hegel's, Aufhebung is supposed to be a violation of the Aristotelian principle of contradiction, because It's something like the meaning of Aufhebung is, as proposed by Yvon Gauthier, a Canadian philosopher, said Aufhebung can be translated as sursumption. It's something different from subsumption. The content subsumption, you apply a predicate to a subject, and this is different. This is something different, but what? It's exactly Aufhebung. It's supposed to be transformation and conservation. You concept something and you transform at the same time. This is something like a dynamic view of ontology, as you say this morning. I totally agree. Anyway. So here is a different view of Aristotle concerning the principle of non-contradiction. So that's the ontologic view of contradiction. You say something about a thing. That's a logical view of contradiction. It's not possible for true proposition, contradictory propositions to be true together, and the psychological version about belief. It's not possible to believe that something is and is not. Three different versions of contradiction. And according to Hegel, everything is self-contradictory. So of course there's something like a variation, but at the same time, if you read texts about Hegel's logic, it says this text that at the same time, Hegel respected Aristotle's principle of non-contradiction. How is it possible to say this, and at the same time to respect Aristotle's principle of non-contradiction? Maybe that problem comes from the meaning of contradiction, or the meaning of truth, or the meaning of identity, or the meaning of change, or the meaning of, I don't know exactly what. Yes, that's just a very provocative motto in Hegel's Argumentationsschrift. Contradictio est regular veri, non contradictio falsi. That's not the whole story. Because you have to understand the meaning of truth and falsity before saying false. And another problem is the color exclusion problem. This problem has been approached by Wittgenstein, who say it's not possible to reduce this problem with a logical way, because the incompatibility between red and blue, for instance, cannot be reduced into a logical contradiction. So according to Wittgenstein, there was a death of the Tractarian period. It's not possible to apply something like a logical analysis in order to account for such an incompatibility between colors. That was the point of Wittgenstein. And then the transition between the early and the late Wittgenstein is said. Yeah, for two colors, it's impossible, indeed logically impossible, for it's excluded by the logical structure of color. But what is exactly the structure of color? Is there a structure of color or not? Maybe if you consider something in physical terms of waves, wavelengths, for instance, maybe it should be possible to have something like a structure, a physical structure. But the physical structure is not a logical one. That was the problem with the tractors. Something like synthetic a priori judgment about colors. So I have to be quick because I want to approach my way of finding a general logical framework in order to approach these problems. And the third problem has to do with Eastern negations. Especially I approach two different Indian theories, Saptabhangi, sevenfold predication, the theory of sevenfold predication, and Chatuskoti. It's a Madhyamaka school, it means fourfold negation. Chatuskoti consists in denying each of the four different statements. So does a thing of being come out itself? No. Out the other? Contradiction? No. Out both? No. Out neither? No. So what do we say exactly? Do we say nothing or do we say anything, something? So that's a problem with the way of expressing a skeptic stance in a language, so to say. And this problem has been approached, proposed by Nagarjuna. And the question is it possible to have a logical analysis of this stance? It is, but provided that you change the logic, the logical framework. Okay, what is exactly question-answer semantics? It's a way to make sense of a general theory of negation. It's a framework, in the sense that in this point, in this framework, you have a set of operations upon objects. And this object can be everything. You have a general ontology, object, table, myself, nothingness, whatever you want, and you apply operations upon these objects, irrespective of their level of language. There is no level of language in this ontology. And it's interesting to use this framework, hopefully, about negation, because when you want to define truth or falsity or negation in general, there is a very interesting problem approached by Slater in '95. He say, Paraconsistent negation is a logical system. Paraconsistent negation is not a proper negation, because with this negation, it's possible to have the truth of this sentence and the negation of this sentence. But this is a violation of the contradictory forming view of negation. So the question is every negation a contradictory forming operator, or could there be other sorts of negation? So Slater's paper was a way to launch the general problem about the fear of negation, so to say. Okay, so there is something like a chicken and egg problem with truth and belief, because what is exactly the relation between both concepts? In philosophy, of course. I don't want to talk about Tarski's view of truth in general from a semantic or neutral point of view, but here, to make sense of truth. According to a subjective truth, you say what is true is just true for me. It's a very, very limited view of truth. And of course, there's a problem with this relativist view of truth, because as Plato said in Protagoras, if the sensation is your impression about something, judgment is sufficient to establish the truth of a judgment, you can say that a pig is equally true as you when he tastes wine, so to say, or when he eats something. And there is something like a reduction and absurdum in this position of subjectivity in truth. So, in this case, it could be said that the contradiction of subjectivity, ontological truth, is a way in order to give a clear definition of truth. Truth is what's the case. So truth is what corresponds to a fact, according to correspondence theory of truth. And Russell gave another definition of truth, very interesting, because according to Russell, for instance, a proposition that is supposed to be true or false, according to the general definition of ambivalent of proposition, is therefore a class of facts, psychological or linguistic, defined as standing into a certain relation to a certain fact. So you need a fact in order to define the proposition in this paper from 23. At the same time, Frege says that truth is a reference of a sentence in his very general theory of meaning, according to which each meaningful entity has both meaning, a sense, and reference, and the truth and falsity are supposed to be reference, Bedeutung. A very, very famous quotation by Frege. But the problem is that there is something like a circularity between truth and fact, because truth, if truth is considered to be a property of a sentence corresponding to a fact, at the same time, a fact is that which makes the proposition true. So in both cases, you use the term as a definitum or as a definiance of the other one. So you have something like a circular definition between truth and fact from these philosophical problematics of truth. So another definitum is indeed for truth, and I would like to use epistemic truth, according to which it's not just a subjective view of truth, it's something like an intersubjective view of truth. I wanted to use this quotation from Peirce, because according to Peirce, truth is something like a normative concept, according to which one sentence is taken to be accepted for everyone in a community. But here we have something like a sliding between being true and being taken to be true. And the difference between both is the logical difference between true values and marked values. For instance, in logic, Belknap proposed something like a four-value logic, in which the meaning of being is not being true or being false, it's being taken to be false or being told false or being told true. And the difference between both can be justified by this epistemic view of truth. So I'm going too quickly, clearly, but I have to go. So in this logical framework, the point is to say that truth is can be defined in terms of assertion, and falsity can be defined in terms of rejection. So we reject if you don't commit into the value of the sentence. You say no. If you commit into the value of a sentence or statement or whatever you want, if you commit to the value, you say yes, it's such and such. So if you commit or don't commit, you accept or you reject. So we reduce, in this case, truth and falsity to psychological acts or judgments. But that doesn't mean that you are reducing logic to something like a psychologism, as was very usually said by Frege or Husserl. That's not the case here, because you can have just an epistemic view of truth without falling into psychologism. So here you have something like P is a proposition, for instance. You ask a question about this proposition, and you say, is P accepted in a community or according to you or according to whatever you want, yes or no. And it's possible to say that, for instance, the proposition P is neither accepted nor rejected, in the sense that you don't say this sentence is true for a community or for a network of computers or for whatever you want, and you don't say that's false. You don't say anything, you don't. You hesitate about the meaning of this sentence. And by this way, it's possible to have something between, of course, truth and falsehood. It's very used, it's just a locus classicus in many value logics. I would like to give a philosophical sense to this problem, so to say. Have 10 minutes?
Yes, 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. So, by this way, I've said that possible words, this QAS, question-answer semantics, is something like an algebraic semantics. You're asking questions in order to catch the value of an object. For instance, a table, myself, or nothingness, anything you want. And you're asking a question. And you say you have something like a string of properties in order to individuate this object, and you say yes or no to each of the questions. So this means that the value of the object is a bit string. With computer science, it's very famous. Huh? We have a bit string of yes or no answers with respect to definite questions concerning the properties of the object. So we can define by this way a sentence, objects, individuals, higher order concept, whatever you want. So tautologies and ontologies are supposed to be only yes answers or only no answers. It's a way to say, when you say yes for everything about an object, this object has no sense. Because an object, a table, is supposed to be something and not be something in order to make sense. As said by Spinoza when determinatio est negatio est. You are supposed to be yes about some questions and no. But here you have only one question, only yes answers or only no answers, no sense. Tautology, ontology, as in Wittgenstein's tractatus. So we have different definition of negation. I take contrariety, contradiction, subcontrariety, and subalternation to be different ways of negating. And it's just, you have a function, you apply a function to a bit string, and the resulting new bit string results from a negation. And denial, I say no, it's just a zero value. You say no, and negation, you apply an operation upon a string of yes and no answers. That's the difference between negation and denial. Negation and Verneinung in Frege's language, for instance. That's the general part. And I would just like to show you that it's feasible. For instance, here is a hexagon, general hexagon. You have alpha is everything, table, a sentence, myself, nothingness, everything you want. And you have this sort of relation, algebraic relations between objects. So here as a contrariety, contrariety means that you apply a function of contrariety upon an object, and you obtain something contrary. If you apply a contrary negation upon white, you obtain black, for instance. If you apply this contradictory negation to white, you obtain not white. Not white is not the same as black, etc., etc. Here is imaginary. It's algebraically finite. Of course, you need a finite set of questions in order to make sense of an object. And these are the solutions. It's just a way to keep the suspense, because I won't have time to present these solutions, but there are some solutions for a Parmenid's problem of non-being. For Heidegger's quotation, it's possible to make sense of Heidegger's quotations with a very, very interesting algebraic transformation, so to say. So, blah, blah, blah. You can have the time to do this. It's just a way to apply it's just a way to apply to make sense of an algebraic Boolean transformations of negation and denial. We have a lot of things to do, as you can see. Here is just some words about linguistic negations. We have something like litot, presupposition, implicature, and negrizing. You are not beautiful. According to the hearer, it's supposed to mean I'm ugly. No, I just say you're not beautiful. I don't say you're ugly. It's something like a negrizing negation. It's possible to translate this specific negation as a contrary negation, and not a contradictory negation. The same with what Vitali said this morning. The difference between implicature and presupposition. It's possible to define this specific negation in Boolean terms and by means of a specific opposite forming operation. It's possible to do so. It's very, very strange, exotic, but it's feasible. Yes, the things to do. Huh? And I just have to say that nothingness, what is exactly the meaning of nothingness? Is it the same as contradiction or something else? So, it's at the conclusion. So, just a way to say it's feasible.
1 minute for do this.
Yeah, it's okay. So, the conclusion is there are problems with the meaning of negation in philosophy, in linguistics, in mathematics. I don't know exactly why. How? And I propose a framework in order to make sense of all these different sorts of negation by means of a general opposite forming operation. Tarski proposed an abstract operator of consequence for every logic. I propose an abstract operator of opposition. It's another way to present a logic, so to say, with an algebra, of course. So this is a general theory of negation and the project for the future, so to say. So a formal tool for philosophy, maybe you can apply this in order to make sense of the difference between identity, sameness, equality, change, value, and the like. You can apply this sort of opposition between concepts from ontology, Heidegger or Hegel, art, politics, economics, everything, hopefully. It's proposed to be a developed reflection about the limits of sense. What is exactly the meaning of sense? According to this logical framework, to make sense is to be questionable. You can ask questions about something. If you can ask questions, this makes sense. It's different from the having an answer. It's different. There's a different of the developments with this logical framework in this direction of Eastern systems, especially with Indian negations, Indian philosophies, and the Chinese Yiking. And that's the reason why I would like to talk about this morning, because it's very related to Leibniz, Taoism, and Jung's psychoanalysis especially. How to make sense of this very, very muddling way of thinking in general about negation. And the abstract logical supposition, I just want to propose a dynamic theory of information process. Negation is to transform an information into something else. And you have different ways of negating. So it's the counterpart of Tarski's abstract logic of consequence. We have OP instead of CN. OP opposition, CN consequence. Okay. So if you want to have more information, because we won't have time to do this here, there is a website about the theory of opposition with linguists, psychoanalysts, cognitivists, psychology of perception, about colors, etc., linguists, of course, and you can have an access to this website online. Okay, but sure it's possible.
Thank you very much for this program of investigations, for this series of papers. Yes. Questions?
Short remark to your talk. Do you know that you have such a slide in which you asked what is not being?
Not being.
Not being, yeah?
Did I skip?
Do you know the position of the founder of Warsaw Philosophical School, Kazimierz Twardowski, about the nothing? Or not being?
Twardowski?
Twardowski, yes.
No.
He wrote that nothing is simply a categorical expression.
Think category.
Think categorical expression.
Bottom?
Yes.
Bottom.
Not if bottom, something like bottom. Yes, of course. For this reason, not being, we have not any speculation about it, nothing, because it's in categorical expression. And another one concerning your final sentences. For instance, with Tarski consequences of right. You propose a supposition. Do you know this? Do you know this logical refutation of logics?
Skóra.
It's Lukasiewicz. Lukasiewicz was the center of national kind of work. So maybe this your operators, which is opposite to the consequence of Pentecost, maybe it's refutation operator. Some Polish logician Piotr Lukowski, which proposed such a system with such kind of operator, which is directed in another direction than Tarski operator for consequence. So you have to see what he invented.
Two short answers to this.
Yes.
There is a difference between bottom in logic and nothingness, in the sense that according to this presentation, nothingness is to say no to every question, and no. Bottom, you say no to every question about the property of the object, and nothingness, you cannot say anything. maybe it's a difference between silence and denial in Indian philosophy. Twardowski? Okay, thanks. And secondly, of course, yes, I saw Polish logician about including Skupecki in the 70s, Skóra, with the sphere of rejection. And my question is, what is I guess that this sort of operators is just a subcase of negation. It's something like a contrariety forming operation. And you can have more all-encompassing view of negation in which Skóra or Skupecki operator are just specific cases. I think so. But I have to check. Clearly. I have to. Almost.
Thank you. No. We have a question.
Sorry.
No.
Sorry to bother you. In at least some areas which you have rightly introduced as problematic, there are alternative strategies to just explain away the problem. Like, for example, with regard to truth, you maybe need not commit to an epistemic conception of truth if you're just a deflationist of truth. That is, you just say there is not that much really interesting to say about that concept. That would do away with, for example, negative facts. Think of Davidson, for example, or other deflationist proposals. The same would be true in the area of theory of knowledge. If you just accept a disjunctive account of perception versus hallucination, where you say that, well, mental states, or in your framework, propositions, which purport to have a value, a truth value, are just mere gibberish, just because they are based on deception in the perceptual process, things that McDowell does, for example. So, for each of the problem areas which you make up, or which you open up, there exist alternative strategies to, say, eliminate the problem, or to regard them as Scheinprobleme. So, the question I have with regard to the generality of your program is, what would be your rejoinder to those people to convince them that it is worth to pursue the strategy?
Maybe a reason is about the meaning of contradiction in the debate between Hegel and Aristotle, because I didn't want to say that you need an alternative view of truth in order to settle the problem of negative facts, for instance. Of course, we can be a deflationist. That's all. Okay, it's not to say you can. That was just something like a sketchy way of saying that there are problems with negation, and this framework is a very general, all-encompassing view of formalizing, in order to formalize the meaning of truth, falsity, negation, etc. Of course, there can be general logics in which truth and falsity remain something like a basic notions, or in which falsity can be defined in terms of truth, of course. But here it's just something like an algebraic view, and according to me, negative facts can be solved in this framework, and other problems that might not be solved by the approach you mentioned. Maybe, of course, because I'm not sure to master exactly what you said about these different approaches. Can a deflationist make sense of Heidegger's view, for instance? Das Nicht, das ist nicht. What about the deflationist in this case? Is it important to make sense of Heidegger's philosophy or not? According to me, yes. So I prefer to make sense of Heidegger instead of saying yes to the deflationist.
Thank you. We have no time, unfortunately. Merci beaucoup.